One other notable sequel to Golden Axe is called Golden Axe Warrior. It's not well known because it's a good game. It's well known because it's an early ripoff of another game that we all know. The Sega Genesis! We're not talking about the Sega Genesis specifically, we're talking about Golden Axe, which is not actually originally a Genesis game, my friends. This is the arcade banner for Genesis. We're going to talk about the art a lot because, as you all know, I'm a huge D&D nerd. I love fantasy art, and Golden Axe had great art inspired by great artists, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. We're just going to talk about the game in general, though. Golden Axe came out in 1989. It was a hack-and-slash game developed and published by Sega for arcades, running on the Sega System 16B arcade hardware. The game was well received at the time of its release, and it was later converted for play on many different home systems, not just Sega Genesis. It was on a lot of home consoles, including Sega's own Mega Drive and Genesis and Master System. So they even downscaled it to 8-bit for Master System, which is pretty funny. It's not a very good port. The game's success spawned an entire franchise consisting of several sequels and various spin-offs. The game takes place in the fictional land of Uria, a high fantasy medieval world. An evil entity known as Death Adder has captured the king and his daughter and holds them captive in their castle. He also finds the Golden Axe, the magical emblem of Uria, and threatens to destroy both the axe and the royal family unless the people of Uria accept him as their ruler. So we're going to talk more about the Conan the Barbarian influence on this game, but Death Adder, I didn't realize this until earlier today, but Death Adder is a pretty obvious reference to Thulsa Doom, the bad guy from the Conan movie, James Earl Jones, who just passed away yesterday, by the way. Rest in peace, James. He's named Thulsa Doom, so like Death Doom, there's an obvious analog there. But also Thulsa Doom is like the demigod of a snake cult. And an adder, obviously, is a famous poison snake. Venomous, I should say, snake. So Golden Axe was created by this guy right here, lead designer and producer Makoto Uchida. Uchida is a badass. He made a lot of great games from the arcade generation onward. Uchida's team was asked to produce a new game for Sega Arcade. And he originally pitched an RPG in the style of Dragon Quest, which was really popular at the time. Dragon Quest is the one that started it all. That's what Final Fantasy was, really, really inspired by as well. So he pitched an RPG in the style of Dragon Quest, mostly because Sega wasn't really doing RPGs at the time. The head of Sega, Hayao Nakayama, wanted an action game that would be better suited for arcades and eating quarters. He didn't think an RPG could be made, basically, for an arcade cabinet, and that makes a lot of sense, really. So he asked Uchida to make a Double Dragon-like game. He basically just wanted a straight-up clone of Double Dragon. Uchida was no stranger to action games. He was the lead designer on the popular arcade game Altered Beast, which is a fucking great beat 'em up. Also with a, mythological background. I believe Altered Beast is supposed to take place in Greece.
Rise from your grave.
You morph into different mythological creatures and stuff and beat up other mythological creatures. Great game. A Sega classic. Uchida would also later go on to develop the Die Hard arcade game. And look how busted John McClane looks in this art. The art is actually sweet. And I don't know if y'all played this. This was more of like the Sega Saturn generation. This had like 3D polygon art. It was a really fun arcade cabinet. They had one at the Walmart in my hometown when I was a kid. And I definitely sank a ton of quarters into the Die Hard arcade cabinet. So he made a lot of action games over his career. Uchida did not want to make a direct copy of Double Dragon, so he combined his fantasy RPG concept for a Dragon Quest-like RPG with a Street Fighter-style fighting game, like using different button commands. He wanted that kind of button combo thing, like jump attacks. And then obviously, he took the side-scrolling part of Double Dragon, and he kind of mixed all those things together. Giving weapons to all PCs and NPCs set this game apart from other beat-em-ups at the time, particularly Double Dragon. Again, Uchida did not just want to make a Double Dragon clone, and the big thing he figured out was, well, if everyone has a sword or an axe, like in a fantasy novel, or a sword and sorcery novel, it would really be a lot different. So that was one of the big additions that kind of made Golden Axe its own thing, in addition to, you know, the magic. It also had a very unique art style and a dark fantasy tone, which obviously made it unique to these games as well. The title of the game was originally going to be Battle Axe, but due to copyright issues was changed to Broad Axe. Fun little fact, the kanji that you see there in the game title, it does loosely translate to Broad Axe, even though they call it Golden Axe in Japan too. The head of Sega America, Michael Katz, reportedly wanted this game title to be changed to Golden Axe right before the game was packaged and ready to ship, because he noticed the dwarf character, Gilius Thunderhead, wielded a golden axe. He insisted that he would not put the game out unless Sega agreed to change the name, which is ridiculous. Or so the rumors say. There's multiple sources that say that same rumor. According to numerous sources, the title actually refers to the weapon of the main villain, Death Adder, because in the Genesis version of this game, once they ported it over to Genesis, the dwarf character did not have a golden colored axe anymore. So a lot of people say that it's actually referring to Death Adder's axe, which is kind of bronzy colored, but not really. But according to later lore that was added for the game, the golden axe is a powerful weapon, an artifact in this world. Death Adder is searching for it. It's kind of the MacGuffin for like the later games in the franchise. So Uchida had been studying sword and sorcery heavily for inspiration, partly because he wanted to make a Dragon Quest-like game. He cited the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Conan the Barbarian as the main inspiration for the aesthetic, story, and world design of Golden Axe, which makes perfect sense. We just watched it on stream last night. If you look at the giant set pieces and the way the characters look, especially the baddies, and then you look at Golden Axe, there is tons of similarities in the art style. That's part of the reason why Golden Axe is so fucking badass. They went with a very adult, very gritty fantasy look, just like an 80s movie, you know, would have in the sword and sorcery genre. And I fucking love that. It's one of my favorite just kind of aesthetics in general. Apparently, Uchida watched his copy of Conan the Barbarian so much while gathering inspiration for Golden Axe that he actually wore out the videotape.
Warrior.
He's evil, a sorcerer who can summon demons.
Now they will know why they are afraid of the dark. Now they will learn why they fear the night.
Conan the Barbarian.
They did an amazing job capturing the spirit of Conan in a video game, in my opinion. It's a super short game. It's an arcade game originally, which had slightly less limitations than the Genesis, but not really. And for being an experience you play in an arcade where most games had no fucking story, they were just there to eat your quarters or have ridiculous action. Like, the game has an arc, characters have an arc, there's an awesome villain, and like the mood feels like Conan. So the game was heavily inspired by other 80s action movies, particularly Rambo. Multiple death sounds and screams were sampled from Conan and from Rambo to be used for the enemies in the game. I actually have a nice little example. That was Rambo. I know it wasn't like potato quality, but obviously the exact same scream. Now, that particular scream sample did not make it into the Genesis version because the Genesis had just a much smaller memory and storage. It couldn't hold as many samples, but still a lot of the samples that made it into the Genesis version are also from Rambo and from Conan. So Uchida also gathered much inspiration from famous sword and sorcery artists like Frank Frazetta, Brahm, and Boris Vallejo. Those are three of my favorite artists probably of all time. Brahm and Boris Vallejo both contributed heavily to Dungeons & Dragons art in the 80s and 90s. I believe Brahm made Magic the Gathering cards as well. Boris Vallejo definitely has done the art for a lot of Magic the Gathering cards. Frank Frazetta is a little older. He was a little too old to contribute to those things, but he was kind of the grandfather of this art style. Artwork of Conan the Barbarian from all three artists was the inspiration for the main playable character in Golden Axe. His name was Axe Battler. A little on the nose, but still good. So this is a Frazetta art right here of Conan. I'm going to show you 3 different Conan arts. Here's a Brahm depiction of Conan. Pretty fucking awesome. And then here's Boris Vallejo. That's his depiction of Conan. This is Axe Battler. He was very much directly inspired by Conan the Barbarian and these 3 famous renditions of Conan. Obviously his hair is not as long, but pretty damn similar. Uchida collected Lord of the Rings concept art and paintings for inspiration. Like, he apparently was obsessively collecting concept art from Lord of the Rings. The playable character Gilius Thunderhead, the dwarf character, was inspired by the dwarves of Middle-earth, especially Gimli and his axe. So this is just a super classic Lord of the Rings artwork. This is one of my favorite of all time Lord of the Rings concept pieces. It's called Gandalf Facing the Witch King by artist Angus McBride. And then here's a Gimli. This is called 42 by Matthew Stewart. It's an image of Gimli. And then here is Gilius Thunderhead from Golden Axe. Pretty obvious inspiration there. Boris Vallejo's mini paintings of badass heroic women in fantasy settings were the inspiration for the only female player character, Tyrus Flare, who, by the way, used fire magic. Also a bit on the nose. Here she is. That's a Boris Vallejo right there. I believe this one's called Sunset Encounter. But even the dragon looks like a Bizarrian from Golden Axe. Here's Boris Vallejo and his wife, Julie Bell. They're both amazing, very famous fantasy artists. And they're still doing it. You might recognize Boris Vallejo's art from other things, like this fucking awesome vacation cover. He also did the European vacation cover. This is just a super iconic movie poster. And him and his wife, Julie Bell, together did a parody of this. And I think this is a parody of an older work. But the parody you all might recognize from the Aqua Teen movie. And same artist, he did all of this, which is hilarious. Uchida was so inspired by him, they actually got Boris Vallejo to paint the cover art for the Mega Drive port of the game. The European and Asian releases of the game used this cover art by artist Boris Vallejo. I love this art. The one on the right, especially here, I'll turn my camera off so you guys get a full picture of it. You can see the turtle with the mountain and the village on his back in the background. You can see Death Adder's castle and then like the ghost image of Death Adder in the clouds. So anyway, those are the Boris Vallejo cover arts for the European and Japanese release. So Golden Axe's branding and promotional material featured art inspired by these artists with much more adult themes and imagery than any Nintendo games at the time. Another artist, Dermit Power, was hired to do much of the cover art and promotional art, including the cover for the DOS and Atari ST port of the game. This is that art. Here's that same cover art in an awesome old magazine ad. Dermit Power is renowned for his comic book art in the 80s and 90s and his concept art that he still does to this day. He gained recognition originally for his contributions to the comic 2000 AD and its feature story, Judge Dredd. Dermit Power is a very famous Judge Dredd artist. But he also did concept art for multiple Tim Burton movies, multiple Star Wars movies, and a number of video game series. He also did the cover art for BioShock 2. So the arcade game was successful and well-liked by kids and critics alike. Sega quickly decided to port the game to home game systems. Many of these were badly ported, giving a subpar experience to the arcade experience. The Sega Genesis Mega Drive version of the game, however, was a very good port, making few compromises from the arcade version and even adding an extra final level. People generally praise the Sega port as being almost as good as the arcade version. There's very little that's changed. But the big difference was because they added an extra level and an extra final boss, they got rid of the arcade ending, which is much beloved and kind of sticks with a theme of goofy arcade game endings that Sega had going for it. Here's the original arcade ending of Golden Axe. And Congratulations. Wait, what? They're coming out of the arcade. The song is also fucking great here. It's like very comedic tone. Oh no, they're loose in the city. The fake ads on the billboards are pretty funny as well. There's like a soda ad that says Hikari Sweat. And something with the Sega logo, but it says Haga. Kiri Kiri. Presented for you by Sega. See you next game. Alright, Golden Axe advertising. Let's just watch some ads real fast. There aren't as many ads for this as there were for the Genesis in general, but there is some fun ones. And I'm gonna introduce you to a Sega mascot that you may not have known. Not Sonic, not that little hedgehog. First, this is just like the original ad for Golden Axe.
Thy quest is to crush Death Adder's evil henchmen. Seek wisdom from your Sega hotline and face thy destiny. Golden Axe, 'tis mighty serious fun.
That's it. But one thing to notice here is he says, seek help from your Sega hotline. He's trying to promote the Sega hotline, but he says it weird. The game help hotline was such a popular thing, and the calls per minute were very expensive. In fact, I'm pretty sure I got in trouble from calling the Sega or Nintendo hotline as a kid and not realizing it was going to show up as like a $60 charge on the phone bill. So here's the one that I was telling you about. The character in this ad is called Jimmy. So this is like the second or third Jimmy ad. We'll watch this one first, then we'll go back and watch the original Jimmy ad so you get a little more context. But this is a ridiculous advertisement.
So, you slaughtered the son of Death Adder, barbecued his freaks. How do you progress to level 8? Well, you eat fast food, you humiliate every machine in the arcade, and you And you practice for real. That's my sidekick. Game over, sunshine.
Yeah, so that's a Jimmy's ad. It was a UK exclusive ad. First of all, what the fuck? Where does Jimmy live / hang out? Like, he lives in the casino level from Sonic. He's like in one of the spinny teacup rides, but like the cooler version, like the Sizzler. He's in like a Sizzler cart from a carnival. He's got slot machines, and he's playing Sega in it. It's just fucking bizarre. And then yeah, this is a Shinobi crossover. His like little sidekick who's in all the commercials with him is dressed as a ninja in this one. Unfortunately, it's hard to find more of these because there are more Jimmy ads out there. But yeah, so Sega had this mascot spokesperson in their Genesis ads in the UK named Jimmy, and he was just like a hunky 20-something who will show his origin story in the first commercial. He's altered like cyberpunk style with cybernetics to be good at video games, and he's fucking awesome at games. He's super hot, he's super cool. It's just part of them trying to make the system look cool for like older teens. I think that's what the whole point is. It's all very weird. Here's the first Jimmy ad. Check it out. This one's also fucking unhinged.
Now, sir.
Give me the Cyber Razor Cut.
Cyber Razor Cut.
Like he's at a flesh ripper doctor from like a cyberpunk movie. He's turning his arm into cybernetic robotics. So he's really good at games. Got cybernetic eyes.
There
show-
are 100 megabyte games. They get faster, they get harder.
What are you going to do to keep up?
To be this good, thanks, Sega.
They show his little sidekick character in that one too. Anyway, super fucking weird. So the success of the first Golden Axe spawned a franchise, including Golden Axe 2, which was a Sega Genesis exclusive, not an arcade game. There was also a arcade exclusive that was called Revenge of Death Adder. The second one, Golden Axe 2, was also developed and designed by Makoto Uchida, and he didn't really work on any of the other Golden Axe games after that. Every other entry in the series, other than Golden Axe 2 and Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder, that's the arcade specific one, were pretty much given terrible reviews. There's pretty much everyone is bad. There is a fighting game for the Sega Saturn and maybe Sega CD that looks really fucking cool, and people do like that, but it was just so undermarketed no one knew about it. Well, Golden Axe 2 is great, and it had an awesome commercial. This is Japanese commercial, so of course I don't understand what they're saying, but the production value is super badass. Check this out. So cool. Love that. So one other notable sequel to Golden Axe is called Golden Axe Warrior. It was for the Sega Master System, so it was 8-bit. It's not well known because it's a good game. It's well known because it's an early ripoff of another game that we all know. Down to like the bad guys, it's a straight up Zelda ripoff. But you get to play as the Golden Axe characters. The third Golden Axe game, Golden Axe 3, was never available in the States except for through the Sega channel, which is kind of interesting. It was not well received, even though if you go back and play it, it by far has the most depth to the gameplay. I don't know if y'all remember Sega channel, but Sega was essentially delivering content to consoles, to Genesis and Mega Drive consoles, through the internet. Back in the day, it was very expensive, but basically through cable, through coax cable, Sega could flash new games to a blank cartridge on your system once a month. And that, to me, is insane and super ahead of its time. Maybe so far ahead of its time that it was too soon. Like, people did not, jump on board enough to make it, super successful. All right, so we're almost done. Let's just talk about the music quickly. There's really not a lot out there about the music of Golden Axe, other than it's great, and it did get an album re-release, like, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. I don't remember the exact year, but fairly recently. The music is awesome. It has generally always been hailed as being great. This guy, Toru Nakabayashi, also called Master, composed the soundtrack for Golden Axe. In the early game dev days of consoles, Nintendo and Sega were so competitive that they would not let game designers and highly technical and skilled game employees list their actual names in the credits. They made them use pseudonyms so they could not be poached by other companies. So he was credited as Master in most of his games. Toru Nakabayashi, he was a longtime Sega sound designer who composed for many of their company's arcade games in the 80s. He also composed the music for Altered Beast and Alien Syndrome, so he also had a history of working with Uchida. So that's it. That's the history of Golden Axe 1 on arcade and Sega Genesis. My sources, of course, are Wikipedia. As always, I just use the couple articles that exist on Golden Axe. And I want to give a specific shout out to a YouTuber who made a history of Golden Axe video. I watched maybe 6 history of Golden Axe videos from different people. But I am giving Patman QC, History of Arcade Game Documentaries, I'm giving Patman the credit because his was by far the most fun to watch, the most informative, But anyway, yeah, that's the history of Golden Axe, y'all. It's one of my favorite games ever. I love Conan. Always have. Come by anytime. We usually stream Mondays and Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, we do a little thing where I make video game music inspired by a retro game or a game that I love. And today we're doing Golden Axe, and we usually do a little deep dive on the game before we get into making music inspired by it.